Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our program. I hope everyone has their tea ready as we pay homage to the suffragists who organized tea parties to promote and even branded their own tea, which they called equality. This is going to be an interesting and informative discussion today. And thank you to our panelists who agreed to participate. But first, my name is Melanie Bonanno, and I have the pleasure of serving as a commissioner on the Florida Commission on the Status of Women, and I'm thrilled to be here with you. Created in 1991, the Commission is a nonpartisan body comprised of 22 commissioners who focus on raising awareness and celebrating the contributions and successes of women. The Commission hosts community conversations, educational forums, and seminars on issues impacting the lives of women. If you would like to know more about the Commission, please visit our website at www.fcsw.net. Part of the Commission's mission is to recognize and celebrate women's history, presenting us the opportunity to recognize and celebrate the many ways that women's history has become woven into the fabric of our state and our national story. The courageous vision championed by women of past generations inspires us to defend the dreams and opportunities for those to come. 2020 marks the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, which allowed U.S. citizens to vote regardless of sex. For 70 years, women throughout the United States organized and petitioned at the state and national level for their right to vote. And on August 18, 1920, U.S. women won a huge battle with the ratification of the 19th Amendment in Tennessee. But that was just the beginning of the story. Although women had the right to vote, they still had work to do to be able to participate in the judicial process and become lawyers, judges, and serve on juries. Remember the screenplay 12 Angry Men, which was about a courtroom drama? Well, it was called that because when it was written in 1954, it was about a jury at a time when women rarely served on juries. While Wyoming first allowed women to fill jury positions in 1898, and the Civil Rights Act of 1957 gave women the right to serve on federal juries, it wasn't until 1973 that all 50 states allowed women to be jurists. Joining us today to give us insight into how women have impacted the legal field are Florida Supreme Court Justice Jamie Grosshans, Florida State Representative and member of the Florida Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission, Fentrice Driskell, and Florida Bar President Dori Foster Morales. First, Justice Grosshans was appointed to the Florida Supreme Court on September 14, 2020. Previously, she was appointed to the 5th District Court of Appeal in 2018 by Governor Rick Scott. Prior to her appointment to the appellate court, she served as an Orange County court judge in the 9th Judicial Circuit of Florida, where she presided over both criminal and civil matters. Representative Driskell first assumed office in 2018 and won re-election to the Florida House of Representatives to represent District 63 outright in the general election on November 3rd, 2020. Congratulations. In 2019, she was appointed by the then House Speaker to the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission. A Tampa attorney and trusted leader, Representative Driskell attended Harvard, where she graduated with honors and was the first African-American female student to serve as president of the undergraduate student body. She subsequently graduated from Georgetown Law School, and in her career, she is an attorney and a partner at the Carlton Fields Law Firm. Florida Bar President Dori Foster Morales is a partner at the law firm Foster Morales, Sokol and Stone, where she exclusively practices in the area of marital and family law. She is both board certified in marital and family law by the Florida Bar and by the National Board of Trial Advocacy as a family law trial advocate. And she was awarded the Legal Luminaries Award by the Dade County Bar Association as the top matrimonial and family law attorney in Miami-Dade County. Welcome to you all. I'll start by turning the program over to Florida Bar President Foster Morales.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here today alongside Justice Grosshans and Representative Driskell to speak on this important issue. Thank you, of course, to the Florida Commission on the Status of Women and the Florida Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission for giving me this opportunity to speak about the impact of the 19th Amendment on Florida lawyers. A little perspective by the numbers. When the 19th Amendment was ratified on August 18, 1920, there had been 22 women lawyers admitted to practice law in Florida, 22. Today, there are over 35,000 women lawyers in Florida, and we make up 39% of the Florida bar of those eligible to practice law and are in good standing. These numbers show us that there has been tremendous progress over the years in terms of gender diversity in the legal profession. But of course, there's still work to be done. If we are going to continue to make progress, it is important to reflect on what I believe is our past and remember how we got here. So first, a little bit about the first woman lawyer in Florida. Her name was Louise Rebecca Pinau. She was Florida's first woman lawyer. She was admitted to practice by the Florida Supreme Court in 1898. Miss Pinau and her family moved to Levy County, Florida in the 1890s, and her father, who must have been a very progressive guy, he was a practicing lawyer and later a probate judge. Ms. Pinau studied law in her father's law office for 2 years before taking the bar exam and being admitted to practice law. Her career spanned almost 60 years. She focused on railroad law, which I would imagine was a real man's world back then. It was also a popular area of practice. She was highly respected, well known in legal circles throughout the state of Florida. She truly opened the door for all future women in the law. In 1958, she was quoted as saying, "Women have proved that they can go into almost any field and be successful if they work at it." A true leader in the legal profession. So there have been challenges in the legal profession. And over the past century, women, while they've solidified their legal profession, their place in the legal profession, there have been challenges along the way. Women attorneys in Florida would face all male juries, as you heard, until 1949, when the state first allowed women to volunteer for jury service. And as you can imagine, I'm sure not a lot of women volunteered. In 1975, the US Supreme Court actually held that excluding women from jury duty was unconstitutional, not really open the doors to women in the jury pool. And we can talk a lot about why that's so important, but for now, let's just say that, you know, to have a jury of your peers, you need all of your peers on that jury. That would include women. In 2016, the Young Lawyers Division of the Florida Bar, and I think Representative Driskell was on the Young Lawyers Division at that time, released its results on women in the legal profession, and they highlighted the prevalence of gender bias. And most women lawyers at some time in their career have faced some gender bias. It's been supported also by the ABA research, which says that women are leaving the profession at the height of their careers. And they say there are a number of reasons for that, including insufficient work-life, home-life balance, unequal compensation, and advancement opportunities. The bar has been proactive in addressing gender bias and making diversity and inclusion in the profession truly a top priority. We support programs that create opportunities for all attorneys, no matter what their gender, racial, ethnic, or cultural backgrounds are. And I actually believe this pandemic in particular for women has been a great equalizer, because things like working from home, which at times were viewed as askance if you weren't in the office, is no longer the exclusive domain of working moms. Everyone has learned to work at home, and I think that's going to help the mission of gender diversity. Currently, women make up 39% of the bar, as I told you, who are eligible to practice. And the Florida Bar is run by the Board of Governors. I, as president, preside sort of as the CEO of the board. 30% of the Board of Governors is made up of women. When I joined the Board of Governors in 2008, it was only 19% women. So we've made great strides even then. And in fact, being from Miami-Dade County, we had a delegation of 8 lawyers, And but for the fact my running for the Board of Governors, there would have been no women from Miami-Dade County on the Board of Governors. So it's really been important to see leadership roles encouraged, because without that, we won't have women in those leadership roles. Generally speaking, it has been so helpful for me to see in my profession leaders that came before me that encouraged me and encouraged other women to sort of step through the doors of leadership. Pat Seitz, those of you that don't know, was the first woman president of the Florida Bar. That happened in 1993, and I was a young lawyer when Judge Seitz, she's now a federal judge, became the first female bar president. So it's still a relatively recent milestone in our history, the bar's history, that we had a woman leader. It was truly a monumental accomplishment. It was a contested race. There was no one that said, yes, we must have a woman who leads the bar. And in fact, as you can imagine, it was a contested race. And while Judge Seitz won, it wasn't like there was universal support for a woman bar president at that time. I think things have changed a lot. And one of the reasons I ran for the Board of Governors was just for what I was talking about before, that without my having run, there would have been no women from Miami-Dade County. And I believe it's important, whether it's on the Board of Governors or in other leadership roles, that we have a diversity of voices. And I thought it was essential for representation to be from all parts of our bar. So in closing, my comments, as only the 7th woman bar president, I'm very, very indebted to the suffragettes, who were brave and had the strength to shatter the most significant glass ceiling of all, guaranteeing the women the right to vote in this country. I'm incredibly grateful to the many inspirational lawyers who came before me. But like the rest of the Constitution, the 19th Amendment is a living document that challenges us daily to continue to aspire to the ideals and principles embodied in that amendment. And I am committed to those ideals. We must continue to strive for greater diversity and inclusion in the legal profession of women, and open the door even wider for the young women that are going to pass through those doors in the future. And with that, I would hand off my comments and ask Justice Grosshans to step in and speak about the judiciary and the women in that field.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am very honored to be here with you today and to chat about the remarkable women that have helped shape Florida's judiciary into what it is today. 2 years after the 19th Amendment was ratified, Bessie Bellinger became the first female appointed to judicial office in Florida. She filled the position left vacant by her husband's death and soon earned the respect of the Pensacola community. At the time, the Women's Lawyer Journal wrote about the significance of her appointment, saying, "Elevating women lawyers to the bench testifies to their status in the profession, but in a Southern state, it means more than that. It means the last barriers to equal opportunity for men and women give way before the onsweep of progressive thought." Just 2 years later, Edith Atkinson became the first woman elected to serve as a judge in Florida. She ran to fill a position in Miami for a juvenile judge and defeated 2 men for that office. She traveled throughout the county visiting juvenile systems and learning about that particular court system. Her efforts in securing legal representation for the poor helped form what is now the Legal Aid of Dade County. In the 20 years after the 19th Amendment passed, the number of female lawyers exploded to 119, a significant increase from only the 19 female lawyers that had been admitted prior to the amendment. By 1969, Florida had admitted 149 women to the practice of law. However, it was not until 1974 that we saw the 3rd female judge appointed in Florida. Her name was Susan Black. She was appointed in Duval County, eventually becoming the first federal female judge appointed in Florida, and rose to the 11th Circuit. The slow and steady push for this equality continued, and the 1980s finally brought several significant events. Sandra Day O'Connor became the first woman appointed to the United States Supreme Court. Leah Sims was the first African-American female judge appointed in Miami-Dade County. The 1980s also saw the appointment and election of Cuban-American females to the bench, as well as the appointment of Rosemary Barkat to the 4th DCA. At the time, Judge Barkat had only been a member of the bar for 14 years and a trial court judge for 5 of those. By 1990, women made up about 20% of attorneys in Florida, but only about 10% of the judiciary. In 1992, Rosemary Barkat became the first woman appointed to the Florida Supreme Court. Suddenly, 150 years of Mr. Justice, as they were called, turned simply to justice, and a new modern era was born that ushered in a rise of women in the law across the board. The past 10 years alone, we've seen a dramatic rise, with approximately 43% of judicial appointments going to women in the past 10 years, despite the fact that women comprise less than 40% of practicing attorneys in Florida. Now, almost 30 years after Judge Barkat's appointment, I sit at the same desk at the Florida Supreme Court where she once labored. And now women make up over 40% of Florida's judiciary. They serve with distinction at every level. They tirelessly serve their communities. They engage in civic activities. They serve on task forces. They serve on committees. They spend countless hours instructing new generations of attorneys as they learn to practice law in this state. So, as the Women's Law Journal predicted, we continue to witness the onsweep of progressive thought predicted 100 years ago, and we stand on the shoulders of all of those women who believe that they deserve the right to have an equal place in the leadership of Florida. Thank you for having me today, and I will turn it over to Representative Driskell.
Thank you so much, Justice Grosshans. I also am delighted to be with you today, and I have been tasked with talking about women making progress in the electorate and running for office since gaining the right to vote. So we honor and celebrate the fact that women were given the right to vote 100 years ago. And to me, it's very important to note that for Black women and women of color, that right, or rather the freedom to vote, came much, much later. So Black women were very active in the women's suffrage movement. On March 3rd, 1913, exactly 66 years, in fact, before the day that I was born, the members of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, of which I'm also very proud to be a member, participated in the Women's Suffrage March in Washington, D.C. Several other Black women participated as well, though they were relegated to marching in the back. And these marches were not pretty little parades with floats and fanfare, as I think sometimes we think of them. They were marches. I mean, they were marching down the streets with crowds of angry men pressing in on both sides. At times, the marches turned violent. But women persevered. And I think that it was both an empowering but also a threatening atmosphere for women to participate in these marches. And how much more so must it have been for women of color who faced the dual reality of being women, but also of not being white. So, you know, even though women of color fought for the right to vote, they really didn't get that freedom until the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. And so I share these remarks on how far women have come since the passage of the 19th Amendment with respect to public service, but I want you to keep this context in mind that for some women, it hasn't been as long of a runway to try to run for office and to do some of these things. The second historical point that I wanted to note is that Florida itself has had a checkered history with the 19th Amendment. Most women's suffrage groups in Florida supported only white women gaining the right to vote, but even so, women's suffrage was slow to gain widespread traction throughout the state In fact, the Florida legislature had the opportunity to be one of the first states to ratify the 19th Amendment after it passed in 1919, but it instead decided to adjourn despite a plea from the governor to ratify it. Florida ultimately ratified the 19th Amendment 50 years later on May 13th, 1969. So a couple things I just wanted to note to kind of set the historical context. While preparing for this panel today, I learned that in Florida, there actually were some communities that had granted women the right to vote on a limited basis before the 19th Amendment was passed. And there is a strong correlation between women having the right to vote and them entering the field of public service and deciding to run for office. Fellsmere, which is a small city in St. Lucie County, was the first to do so. And it added language to its town charter, which was approved by the governor in 1915. And the relevant clause stated, every registered individual, male or female elector shall be qualified to vote at any general or special election held under this charter to elect or recall commissioners at any other special election. So basically, women were given the right to vote in municipal races and sometimes in county races. Women's suffrage activists wanted to capitalize on that victory, and so they pushed for other communities to do the same. And by November 1919, a total of 16 towns in 10 counties allowed women to vote in municipal elections. So with these victories, women started running for office and winning. Marion Horwitz of Moore Haven in Glades County was elected mayor on July 30th, 1917. She was the first woman to serve in such a role in Florida. In 1922, Florida saw its first female candidates for election to the Florida House of Representatives. There were two known female candidates that year. Martice Vera Mccaskill was from Defuniak Springs. She was only 25 years old and very ambitious. She previously had served as a reading clerk in the Florida House of Representatives and also was a woman campus leader at FSU. The other female candidate was Catherine Bell Tippets of St. Petersburg. Unfortunately, neither of their communities were ready to have a woman represent them in the House, and neither of them were successful. But women continued to persevere because that's what we do. So in 1928, Ruth Bryan Owens became the first woman in Florida elected to Congress. She served 2 terms, and then in 1933 was appointed, she became the first woman to serve as a U.S. ambassador. She also was only the second woman from the South to serve in Congress. She was a widow, a mother of 4, and her district stretched all the way from Jacksonville to Key West. And during her campaign, she's known to have, she had a little Ford coupe that was green, and she called it the Spirit of Florida, and she drove across the entire district, that's more than 500 miles, because she believed it was important to reach as many citizens as possible. She's a very inspirational figure, and in fact is the namesake of a statewide organization called Ruthless that focuses on recruiting and training women to run for office. The first woman member of the Florida House of Representatives is Edna Giles Fuller. She was sworn in on April 2nd, 1929. She represented Orange County, and her uncle actually previously had been the mayor of Orlando, so she had some political ties, and her husband had left her a considerable fortune. So she was 55 years old when she took office, and she ran on a record of public service that included heading a state commission to formulate welfare policy, and she had served as assistant food administrator for Florida during World War I. Fast forward to 1970, that's when we had the first Black woman elected to serve in the Florida House of Representatives. Her name was Gwen Sawyer Cherry. She was a graduate of Florida A&M University. She graduated cum laude, and she also graduated there from law, although she had also been admitted to the University of Miami Law School, and in fact was the first Black student admitted there. She actually was only the second Black woman admitted to practice law in the state of Florida, and she was the first Black woman attorney to serve or to practice in Dade County. She also was the first lawmaker to introduce the bill to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment in the state of Florida. That's very special to me, as I was able to carry that bill last legislative session. And through her efforts, Florida became the first Southern state to recognize Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday as a holiday. Carrie Meek in 1979 became the first Black woman elected to serve in the Florida Senate and the first Black to serve in the Senate since Reconstruction. She was elected in 1979, I guess, to the House. She succeeded Mrs. Cherry. She was a former track star at Florida A&M, and she's noted for her humanitarian causes. She also became one of the first Black women to represent Florida in Congress when she was elected in 1992. I also thought, because we have sort of a legal bent to this panel, to look into the first women who were elected to serve as state's attorneys. We know that prosecutors have a great deal of discretion and influence in our criminal justice system. So I thought it'd be interesting to take a look and see what history shows us as the first women who were elected there. So in 1978, a woman who probably needs no introduction to you, Janet Reno, became the first woman elected to serve as a state attorney in Florida, and that was in Dade County. She also became the first woman to go, to serve as the U.S. Attorney General, and has a long and storied career of a number of firsts as she proceeded in the field of criminal and civil justice. Fast forward to 2016, that's when Florida got its first Black woman elected to serve as a state attorney. That's Aramis Ayala, who was elected to serve in Orange County, and ultimately went on to serve for only one term. So what I take away from my research into this history is that women in Florida have come a long way. We still have quite a ways to go, as it is 2020, and we're still making first and still, sometimes only on the first, second, third, or maybe even fifth woman to accomplish a thing. And so what we want to do is, throughout this panel and throughout this centennial celebration, I guess, is really recognize that representation matters. And so celebrate the wins and the victories that we've achieved, but also pay homage to that history and recognize that we still have a long way to go. So thank you so much, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation today.
Excellent. Those were wonderful presentations. Thank you all. And I hope everyone's enjoying their tea like I am and listening to the presentations. But I do have a few questions for you. I'm going to start with Florida Bar President Foster Morales, but I hope all three of you will answer these questions. Why do you think that there's so many women in law school? There's about 52%. And we talked about the number of those in the bar. And yet there's still so few at the highest levels of the senior or equity partner level, for example, at the law firm. So why do you think women are still struggling to obtain those higher level?
Well, thank you for that question. It's a big issue that's been on our minds for the last few years, and we've been studying it. There is definitely considered gender bias in the profession, in the sense that we are seeing women leaving the profession in the height of their careers, which sort of breaks my heart, because I actually love being a lawyer, and I want everyone to love being a lawyer. It's a wonderful profession. So I talked a little bit about some of the prevalence of gender bias in the profession based on some of the studies that we have done, the Young Lawyers Division has done, the ABA research has done, and clearly women feel that. But I think I would be guessing as to why women leave, because some of them are really leaving when they are making partner and that they have a level of dissatisfaction. And sometimes I think maybe the practice of law has a lot of wrinkles to it. It's not perfect, a lot of warts. And I do think that when you look at senior partners at large firms, I want to point this out, 65% of all lawyers in Florida work at small or solo firms. So we're talking about a smaller segment of lawyering. So they're leaving the legal profession, in particular at those firms, in part because those firms, oftentimes people have a sense of a loss of home life, work-life balance. Sometimes I think maybe women lawyers are a little more evolved. Maybe we understand the significance and the need to sort of have that balance, that the struggles of being a partner at a major law firm create sort of a struggle in that balance. But I do know that even the clients themselves are pushing even those law firms. And again, it's the smaller segment of the practice of law than really the bump and grind of most lawyers. but the clients are really pushing. They want women in the legal profession. They want women partners. They want women, first counsel, lead counsel in litigation cases in front of juries. So I think there are a lot of things that are pushing to make it happen, but I do think that again, it's a constant struggle. Again, I really believe that some of the changes in the practice of law that happened so recently as a result of the pandemic are going to make that a bit better. So I'm excited to see how that plays out, recognizing that the number of women partners, women managing partners is woefully inadequate.
Okay, Justice Grosshans, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that was an excellent explanation. And I do think, as the bar president pointed out, we do have to remember that the sector of large firms is not as big in Florida as even it might have been years ago. A lot of women have chosen to have that entrepreneurial spirit, to go start their own firm. And I think today might be a celebration of the entrepreneurial woman, actually. I think I saw that. And I think that that's a really good thing. That shows their clients are willing to come with them, to maybe leave a large firm in order to keep the female attorney that they've been working with. And I think that shows that women are kind of forging their own path and maybe creating a new look of what law is going to look like in the next century, that it will not necessarily all be driven by large firms. There's a need for those. There's also a need for the small firm and the solo practitioner. And I think the fact that women have that choice is a great sort of outpouring of maybe leaving the large firm and what that has looked like.
Okay.
So
Representative Driskell, you have anything to add to that?
Thank you. Yes, I do. I'll add a couple thoughts and then observations. So I think that's right. I mean, I think it's great to celebrate the choice that women have and the entrepreneurial spirit, but I think in also considering that choice, many women like me, that's all I ever wanted to do was work at a large firm. And so for the women for whom that is their choice, I think there are a number of factors that lead to them leaving. You have to always consider compensation, right? And a lot of firms have a closed compensation system. And so that can make it very difficult for women to understand and see whether or not they're being paid the same level as their male counterparts. I think that large firms oftentimes can have that sort of like a boys club sort of a structure. And that's something that you really have to think through. Firm management has to think through and disrupt that bias when it comes to thinking through succession planning for clients. There's this quote that I love that it says, like, it basically boils down to, the two things that people hate the most are the way things are and change. And so as a profession, I think it is incumbent upon us to really take a look at what is happening in these law firms and look at what's happening in the profession, and not just talk to the leaders of the law firms, because leaders of law firms are very good at citing the statistics and we have this many women, but that's only a snapshot in time, right? Like how many women lawyers did you have who started at your firm, who made partner at your firm and are continuing on? To me, that is the more interesting data point. And then also trying to understand what is the lived experiences of women at these firms. So to me, inclusion is diversity 2.0, and inclusion represents the actions that must be taken to share power, right? So there is greater representation of women, and so that there's greater inclusion when it comes to dividing up that pie with clients and compensation. And because that is not happening, and because I think large law firms do not do a good job, particularly of onboarding women lawyers when they come back from parental leave, there are a number of factors mixed in there why women leave big firms. But the good news is that we can change it if we have the internal will to do so. But in order to do so, people have to get comfortable with change, and the legal profession is not the best at it's not the best at dealing with change. But we're going to continue to push that conversation and hope that we have greater change in years to come.
Well, I'm definitely going to steal that quote. I love that quote. So But for our next question, why do you think women gained the right to vote, it took so long to still have all of these other firsts, women being on juries and women being lawyers, all of those things? Yes, there were a couple examples. You guys provided some great examples today of women who were forging that path first, but it really took a long time from gaining the right to vote to women being more participatory in the judicial process. So I'll start this one with Justice Grosshans. Do you have any insight on that?
I think, history will teach us that things do take time. And as Representative Driskell said, people do not like change and things do take time. And you think about, you had to have a generation of women grow up, first of all, and then they had to teach their children about these issues, more of equality maybe than had been prevalent before. And then those people had to go to law school. And then those people had to come into the community. And so when you just look at the sheer numbers, I think you can see a progression of that. And what I really appreciate is that at this point, my daughter doesn't, she's shocked by the fact that this is not how it always was. She's growing up in a world where this is the norm. It is the norm that someone can be on this Florida Supreme Court, be the bar president, be an important part of the House of Representatives in a state and have that leadership. And that is normal to her, but that takes time to develop that type of normalcy and routine. And so I appreciate that. And I also know there's so many places that she's going to see the progression go as we continue to work toward that in the future. But I do think some of that is just due to time. Some of that is due to society's constraints. And I think that we'll continue to see that progression moving forward.
Okay. Representative Driskell?
I would attribute the slow nature of progress and change to sentiment. You have to consider the sentiment at the time. So even though granting women the right to vote was absolutely the right thing to do, as I mentioned, even at that suffrage march in 1913 and at a subsequent one that took place in Washington, D.C. In 1917, those marches were violent. I mean, those women were accosted by angry mobs of men on both sides. Sometimes the police did not help them. Over 100 women were hospitalized. I think during the march in 1913, you had women being arrested after the march in 1917, and just they were only exercising their constitutional rights of freedom of expression and pressing for equality. We can look back at it now and realize that those aren't really big things, but at the time they were really, really big things. And public sentiment had not caught up in the nation to where it needed to be. So it takes time to change hearts and minds. MLK had a really great quote, something to the effect of, no, a law can't stop a man from hating me, but it might stop him from lynching me, and so I'll take that. It takes a long, long time. It can take a long time sometimes to change sentiment, and I think that's what we're faced with, and we see the vestiges of that today. That's why we still don't have women in places of power and representation to the levels that we need. But I'm optimistic and hopeful for the future that as we continue to press and we continue to run and we continue to challenge those gender norms, hopefully we'll have a more equal society by the time Justice Grosshans' daughter is an adult.
President Foster Morales?
Well, when I thought about this, I thought that, really in the end, even though women were provided these sort of constitutional rights, we lived in a very patriarchal society at that time. Feminism and being a suffragette was not really necessarily considered a good thing. People considered it maybe not such a good thing. There was truly at that time a true societal belief that that these rights could interfere with what they believed was a woman's sort of perceived primary obligation to society, which was to raise families and to have children, and that they needed to be shielded. Women needed to be shielded from the sordid aspects of life, like hearing a criminal case as a juror, or hearing about sexual offenses, and they might in fact be either too scared or sympathetic. There was this need to protect women. Imagine what people would have thought about sequestering male and female jurors together in a long case, and all of those things were the societal reasons that really kept us from being given the right to vote. But even when we were given that right, those social norms didn't change overnight. I was raised that, not only I could do anything, but I should do anything, and that I shouldn't expect anyone to take care of me. My parents always said to me, Dory, no one's going to ever take care of you. And when, in fact, when I got engaged, I think they were a little bit shocked. But there was a time where you didn't want your daughter graduating from college unless she was engaged to be married, because what could she do? She could be a nurse or a teacher. And that was because we were trying to protect women and keep them in their lane. So I think it's taken a long time to realize that our lane is everyone's lane, and little by little we're getting there. Agreed that we have a little further to go, and we need to keep pushing for leadership roles. But clearly, a change in a constitution didn't change societal norms.
Thank you. Those are some really interesting answers. And my daughter also knows no limits. So I appreciate all the women that came before her that make her think anything, and she believes and that anything is possible for her, because she's never experienced it not being possible. So those are some great answers. Before I move on to my next question, I just want to remind our audience that you are able to submit questions. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please remember to submit them. My next question, I'll direct first to Representative Driskell. And why is it, and you talked about this in your presentation, why do you think it's so important for women to be well represented in the legislature, on juries, and on the judiciary? Why is it important societally for women to be equally or fairly represented?
I think the first part is because, what I'll say first anyway, is because I think that women bring something to the table. And I think all of us bring something to the table from our lived experiences. And we want to make sure that we have decision makers, that we have lawmakers who are at the table and who can bring that diversity forth as those important decisions are made. I think that's when we get the best results. I think the second point I would mention is that particularly for judges and for elected officials, for the community to be able to look and see people in those roles who look like them, that actually helps to encourage and reinforce trust in that system. Because now I can see people who look like me, whether it be a woman or a person of color or from LGBTQ community, and understand that I have representation there. And so perhaps there's a greater chance that I'm going to get a fairer outcome, or that my perspectives might be taken into account. I think the third reason why it matters to have women in representation is to show everybody that it's possible. So I think it's equally important for little girls to look and see that anything's possible for them, and that there's not anything that they should not try. But it's also important for little boys to see that, so that they get comfortable with that. And so then as they ascend to these positions of leadership, they can be consciously aware that, yes, women should be at the table as well. And so that it won't be a big deal, and we can have that more equal and less biased society.
That's a great point, thinking about it from terms or the perspective of my sons, not just my daughter. Do either of our other panelists want to add something to that?
I would just say that the bodies must be, whether it's the judiciary, the legislature, the Florida bar, the bodies themselves must be representative of the people whose lives they affect. So the bodies do things. It's not just that they represent, they actually do things. And so if we don't have equal representation, obviously I completely agree with Representative Driskell that it will just lead to distrust of these august bodies. But since we do bring such different experiences, and quite frankly, I am sure that the three women on this panel, we bring different experiences. So it's not just women, but a body of different types of women. You can't say, well, we have a woman, now we've got it covered. So I know Representative Driskell has one shared experience and where she comes from, and each of us bring that. And so if we don't have many different voices, it simply will not be a representational body, which is so important.
Well, we've also gotten a couple questions from our audience, so I'm going to move on to some of those. And this one, I think someone was confused about when we were talking about, I believe this is about the ratification of the 19th Amendment. So put your con law hats on. For me, that was a really long time ago. And the question is, how could Florida legislature ratify an amendment which had already been ratified by the U.S. Congress?
So
who wants to take on that con law question?
In order to ratify a constitutional amendment, it takes 3/4 of the states to do that. So that's why we need, and it's 3/4, it's not a like perfect math, it's like 37.5, I think. And so that's why you need 38 states to ratify a constitutional amendment. And we're not there yet, so we have to keep pushing.
Okay. That was a great answer. Does anyone want to add anything to it?
That's the answer.
Our next question is, what advice would you give a young female lawyer who's interested in maybe becoming a partner one day, or a judge, or a legislator, or the president of the Florida Bar? Essentially, what I think this question is asking is, what advice would you have given your younger self if you could? Who wants to tackle that one?
I can start and then turn it over to the other two. I would say if someone is, when I talk to anyone in law school, my first bit of advice is always, don't expect that what you think you will do now, that you will do for the rest of your career. Don't think inside the box. If you had told me when I was in law school that I would practice family law and criminal defense as an attorney, I would have looked shocked. I never planned on doing that. And then it turned out those were two of the most satisfying parts of my entire career, were being able to practice that type of law. Some people do go in and end up doing the same thing they plan to do. But when I was in law school, I was going to be in international law. I was going to work in a consulate overseas, and maybe be a dolphin trainer on the side. So you see how well none of that has worked out. But instead, I have this amazing path. It just took a different turn than I had expected. So embrace opportunities, look at things you never thought you would be interested in, and try new things. Those are things that I always tell law students. And then for young attorneys or people just starting out their career, my advice is always that your reputation is invaluable. Once lost, very difficult to retain. So being forthright, being honest, being straightforward, not misrepresenting to a court or to fellow attorneys, I think those things are so important, and those things follow you for your careers for years to come. So those are the two bits of advice I would give to any young person in law school or thinking about going into the law.
That's great advice. I know me, myself, I was going to be a criminal law attorney, and I haven't practiced one day of criminal law in 20 years. I've exclusively done employment law. So that's great advice. And I'm sorry the dolphin trainer thing didn't work out. But to Representative Driskell, do you have any advice you would like to give our audience?
Sure. I would say that you have to be self-directed and take charge of your career, because nobody's going to think about your career as much as you do. And I think to Justice Grosshans' point, like, you never know where your career might take you if you're open to the possibilities. And so be open to those possibilities and go for it. If there's an opportunity that you want, be self-directed and go for it. Do not limit yourself because of anything that you may feel might be a limitation or that takes you outside of the norm. You have to seize those opportunities. And then I would also say, seek out mentorship, but also try to find people who can be champions for you. We now talk about that in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that a mentor is wonderful, and you need someone to help you make decisions and think through, important changes that you may consider in your career. But you also want champions to be able to speak for you in the rooms where you may not have access to for quite some time until you become more senior or tick certain boxes. So be open-minded about that as well, in terms of who could be a champion for you. They may not look like you, and that's okay. They may have experiences that are completely different from you, and frankly, that's probably better. But so yeah, those two things: be self-directed and also seek out champions who can promote you in ways that are different than a mentor could.
Also great advice. I love the idea of seeking out a champion. It makes a lot of sense. and to Florida Bar President
So,
Oscar
you know,
Morales.
I would go back to sort of what my folks told me, which was sort of, you don't know what's going to come next. As Justice Grosshans says, yeah, I certainly never thought I was going to do the things that I did, that I would be an environmental lawyer in DC and New York, and then a prosecutor, and then a family lawyer, but things happen along the way. So consider yourself an accidental tourist. My parents also told me, work hard, do what you really love, and the sky's the limit. So I wouldn't necessarily say, as many people say when they're starting out in their careers, this is what I want to do. You know, those could be some of the things you may want to do, but keep an open mind. Don't do something merely for money or fame or title. Do it because you love doing it. Because if you love doing something, you will do it well and you will be successful, whether it's being a judge, a legislator, or bar president. And I think that whatever you decide you want to do, you know, don't limit yourself. And, you know, you always think about, you know, what people say at the end of their careers. And I think it's something we all need to think of as women, something women don't always do a good job of, thinking on their careers and what they want to accomplish. But the 5 things that people say at the end of their career are really worth repeating, which is, one of them is, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. So be true to yourself. The second thing is, I wish I didn't work so hard. So the second thing is, you know, in the process of accomplishing your goals, be sure to stop and smell the roses. The third thing is, I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. And so that means, like, your feelings are important and you need to find a place to do it. And just because you're a woman doesn't mean you should not express them. The fourth thing is, I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. So in being successful, you still need to make time for relationships and friendships. It's not, it's important to sort of do those things. All work and no play is not a good thing. And the final thing is, I wish that I'd let myself be happier. So whatever it is you want to do, whatever goal you want to set, recognize outward success alone, money, fame, fortune, will not provide happiness. So yes, you should follow your goals and your dreams and get mentors, but recognize sort of the bigger picture in your life and be sure that you're mindful of those things as well.
Also excellent advice, and I completely agree. It's really important to love what you do so you can be happy every day, but also be true to yourself. So that was some great advice from our panel. And again, I want to thank our panel. We are very blessed at the Florida Commission on the Status of Women to have such a wonderful panel agree to participate today. So on behalf of the Florida Commission on the Status of Women, we'd like to say thank you again to our esteemed guests for joining us and sharing your expertise and all of your insights. And all of you who joined us today, also thank you for joining us. Again, you can find out more about the Florida Commission on the Status of Women by going to our website, www.fcsw.net. And for those of you who are lawyers, I know we had a lot of lawyers today, you'll be getting information on how to request CLE credit for attending this event. So thank you again for everyone who attended, and have a great rest of your afternoon.